Hello, my name is Manuel Alfaro, and today we are gonna interview a foreigner person. So, can you tell me what is your name, where are you from, and how is the place where you live?
Hello, Manuel. My name is Madeline Witherspoon, and I am from Wichita, Kansas. Wichita is a bigger city in the middle of the United States with some rural communities around it. It is a beautiful place, but it is very flat. We have no mountains.
Oh, wow. So, Madeline, how are the gender roles perceived in your culture there in Kansas?
In some ways, gender roles are still very traditional. Most women in their 20s and 30s get married, have children, and some are stay-at-home housewives. However, it is pretty common for both men and women to have jobs and earn money for their families.
Oh, wow, you have traditional gender roles. And now, how is time understood and measured? For example, how late can you be to a friend's appointment before you are considered rude?
Time is very organized here. If you are supposed to see a friend and you are more than 10 minutes late, I think that would be considered rude. And if you're late to a job or anything more formal, it's very taboo.
Well, I can see that the time is very organized for you there in Kansas. That is part of your culture. And now, let's continue. What are some incorrect assumptions outsiders think of your culture?
That's a good question. I would say a really common misconception about Kansas is that everyone from Kansas is a farmer or works in agriculture. And this stereotype exists because there are some very rural, small towns in Kansas. But Wichita, the city where I'm from, is bigger and has much more business. So most of us don't work in any kind of agriculture. And a misconception about the country, the United States as a whole, I think a lot of people believe that U.S. citizens are not very worldly, very ignorant about international cultures. And while unfortunately that can definitely be true, there are a lot of U.S. citizens who are trying to learn other languages, immerse themselves in other cultures, and be better global citizens.
Wow, those are a couple of very interesting incorrect assumptions that the people may have about your country and about Kansas. Indeed, what you said about Kansas, that's embarrassed, but I have to include myself, probably. That's what I get. That's the assumption I get from movies and TV shows. But let's move on. Let's have another question. What can you tell me are some do's and don'ts of your culture?
That's another good question. I'd say some things it's important to do are to be on time. Like you mentioned earlier, being on time is a very good thing to do. Also, very important to say please and thank you and call people sir or ma'am. Having very polite language and being on time sets a good example for you. Some things not to do. It's not really acceptable to curse, use bad language or a lot of inappropriate slang. Saying very sexual or anti-religious terminology in front of different people can be very rude, and especially if you don't know to what religion someone pertains, if cussing is appropriate, it's never okay to do unless you're with friends. And another big don't is trying to point out differences in religion or race, especially using racial slurs has been a big problem recent culturally. So trying to avoid words that are unkind to people of different religions, racial groups, genders, is very important to us.
Oh, wow. That's a series of important do's and don'ts that we need to consider when we meet a person from Kansas or the US. Well, interesting facts. So, we are barely at the end of this interview. I want to ask you, have you ever visited Costa Rica? If yes, why?
I have actually visited Costa Rica. My first time being in Costa Rica was this past year. I lived there for almost 9 months with a job called the Peace Corps, volunteering at some local colegios and working there. So I went to Costa Rica for the first time last year and only got to stay for a little bit.
Wow, it's pretty interesting to know that you have lived in Costa Rica for 9 months. So, since you have at least some knowledge about the Costa Ricans' way of living and the attitudes that they have, let me ask you something interesting. How is Americans' humor compared to Costa Ricans' humor?
I think that a lot of the times I felt like US humor was more sarcastic and dry. But I think that one thing that Costa Rica has more of is kind of inappropriate jokes. Like there was a lot of sexual humor and things like that that were very funny. And it was much more okay to say jokes like that between coworkers, you know?
Oh, what an interesting fact. Well, I have to say that you are probably right. So we are just at the end, Madeline. I really appreciate everything that you have shared with us, with me especially. Let me ask you, is there anything you would like others to know that we have not included here in this interview about you or your culture?
Thank you, Manuel. I would say the only thing is that one stereotype that some people have about the United States that I noticed is kind of true after visiting Costa Rica is that in the US, we're a little bit colder and less friendly. And I just want to say Costa Rica is the most friendly place. You can easily become family there, and it's just wonderful. Thank you so much for asking me these questions about my home.
Oh, Madeline, it's really good to know that you have that great perspective about Costa Ricans. I'm sure that whenever you come back, if it is possible, they are going to be with their arms wide open for you. Probably, despite of this assumption that we have about you, Americans, this stereotype that you mentioned, I know that we are all willing to be friendly and to have a good relationship with each other, Costa Ricans and Americans. I want to say that I really appreciate the time that you have spent in this interview. And what rest of this is that I want to say thank you and I wish you a great day.